But we're going to get into it. We've got to do the first bits like housekeeping, and then we'll reintroduce ourselves just for any new members that come onto the site later on, and we'll rewatch these because obviously these are all recorded and they will be added to the academy. So let's get into it. Yeah, so general housekeeping, just jump into the chat box and say hello. You can start doing that now. Feel free to type in questions in the chat box and the Q&A. So there's going to be a Q&A at the end. So make sure that any questions you have, just write them in, just so you don't forget, and then we'll answer it all towards the end. And as I said, questions will be live. Q&As will be after the presentation. But please do ask for it. All right, I just realised we can do that as well. Just reread number 3. So yeah, just please drop in your questions. We'll answer them then and then try and remember stuff that you want to answer at the end. And we'll go through it as well, because there'll be a lot of questions from what we're doing. So what we're going to cover, we're going to be going through companion planting explanation. There's a few slides I've got together where I've actually got certain plants that I recommend these certain plants next to like brassicas, let's say, or what I use around fruit trees, just to help resilience, help with pests, and all that good stuff. How to incorporate it and how you can go into your garden like tomorrow and actually start incorporating what plants to put where, how to kind of like shape your garden a little bit as well, which is really cool. And then all the different methods around it, because there's so many aspects to companion planting. Some are good for soil, some are good for adding shade, some is adding flavor, really interesting stuff like that. So we're going to go through it all tonight. We're going to go through my top tips, so stuff that I do consistently on what I've done on the farm for 4 years, and now what I'm doing in people's gardens, back at my allotment, and even some commercial properties as well. And then top plants to plant in the garden. So I've got like a few that I like just go back to year on year. So I'm always like saving seed of that. So I've got an abundance of seed, or whether I'm just making sure that that's in my garden year on year, because I know it's doing a job. Let's have a little look in the chat box quickly. Everyone's just saying hello. Love that. Hey everyone. Please make it more like interactive. That is we absolutely love it when we hear back from you and we talk throughout this, because ultimately this is about community as well, this Food Grow Academy. So we just like to get a buzz around it. We're all geeks for this sort of stuff. I know you are. So it's good to hear your thoughts on the webinar. So, like as I said, we've just got to reintroduce ourselves for anyone that might watch this later. So I'm Jack, originally, owner of Jack's Patch, which I no longer have, but keeping the brand going because it's developing into something completely different now. But I had a market garden for 4 years it was just within the city of London, like within the walls of London, ran M25, and now that bloody road has taken my patch back and they're going to build a road on it, which is absolutely tragic. But I qualified as a permaculture teacher in Costa Rica, but I was inspired by working on a farm in Australia, and I'm actually meeting that farmer in London on Thursday because he's over here and he's got a lot of projects in Europe, and we're going to be doing some stuff together. So I started on my allotment, and I was like by far the youngest guy at my allotment by a long way, and everyone just looked at me like I was had two heads, like what you doing here? And I always was coming with different methods, especially with the permaculture. And once they started seeing results, like they started to realize, whoa, this guy is kind of doing stuff different, but it is working. And I was always blown away with the results, but after learning stuff abroad, it was really nice to come back here, apply it and see it for yourself. Now I'm going into like consulting, design and build. So I'm going into people's garden, giving them a permaculture design, and I'm installing it. We've got a food forest at a pub. We're doing a whole farm in Sussex, which we'll be doing workshops at later in the year. So please come join. That'd be wicked to see your faces. And yeah, just working on all this sort of good stuff. And hopefully by doing multiple jobs, I can inspire you guys to do more. I can teach you guys what I'm doing and how to implement it. Go on, Chris, take it away.
Yeah, so for anyone that hasn't met me, I'm Chris. I started urban farming several years before 2019. Got little plots here, there, and everywhere, a bit like the Curtis Stone approach. And then I took that and threw everything out and got a piece of land. Started an ecological farm at the end of 2019 down in Sussex, and we turned a 4 acre field into a home and a veg box scheme. And over the sort of preceding 3 years, we delivered 4,500 veg boxes in 3 years, which predominantly grew most of it ourselves. A couple of bits bought in through the winter. So it was a hell of a journey. It was real good fun, but we had a little one in last year, and so we sold the farm and moved back to our hometown, which is in Hampshire, and now consulting on growing projects and running. Recently started running Hampshire Veg Box, which is a veg box scheme here that delivers to 120 people weekly. So it's been one hell of a journey. And now it's for both Jack and I, actually, a lot has changed in the last year, but we're hoping to be able to bring all of that to you guys. And you'll notice that I'm the one nerding out about soil health because I'm currently studying Dr. Elaine Ingram's soil food web technician and consultancy course. So I'll soon be a qualified technician and consultant for the soil food web, but I'll also be able to pass that information on to you guys, and we can geek out about soil, and I can tell you how amazing the microbiology under our feet really is.
Cheers, Chris. Right, I need to find how to get this out of the way. Right, so what is companion planting? Then bang, put it.
We can't see it, Jack, by the way. It's just on your screen, mate.
What the
The little box. Yeah.
Oh, even better. So, all right, cool. So, what is companion planting? So, I've got a few things that we're going to dive into today, but as I said before, there's a few things. I kind of mentioned a few things. So, improves flavor. This is something I made this. I'm going to say it was a mistake because it was on an allotment, but in a food forest, it's not a mistake, and that is actually planting mint in the ground, not in a pot. Because mint spreads is a super spreader. It will go under the ground like rhizomes. If you've ever planted mint, you'll soon know you'll never not have mint. But you could have a mint farm very, very quickly. But it actually improves flavor of things like peas. So if you do plant with it, and you can contain it, it actually improves the flavor of peas. There's also an example I had growing tomatoes in my polytunnel year on year, 4 years on the bounce doing like no dig, and I never actually rotated it. I just done tomatoes again and again and again. Even had blight in 2021 and then grew tomatoes the next year in there and didn't have blight. So it kind of showed that crop rotation, obviously it's good practice, but you can grow in the same space as long as you replace the nutrients. And I grew like red streaky mustard in the winter, and the red streaky mustard tasted like it had a tomato flavor to it. So sometimes roots of previous crops or crops that you grow with it can actually enhance flavor of things and actually have an effect. There's even these guys called Seven Rose Seeds in America that work on Blue Hill Farm. They actually use loads of potash, so like charcoal, in with the peppers to actually get a smokiness to the peppers that they're growing. So I find that well interesting. Weed control, actually planting a lot of diversity within beds can really help with weeds. That's because it's almost like fighting the weeds, and also soil likes to be covered. I say like weeds are like sunscreen. What they're doing is they're trying to cover the soil, keep the soil protected, just so there's no need for those weeds to come up and then protect the soil. So sometimes having like a courgette, that leaf is almost like keeping that soil underneath nice and cool, and it does actually help with the weed pressure a little bit, I've found. Brings in pollinators. So as you know, when you plant loads of flowers, like the backdrop of this picture, you are getting all sorts of insects and bees, and that's what we want to be drawing to our plot. We want to be bringing in the good guys to get rid of the bad guys. There is, like for example, the ladybirds come in, and we want to attract them with certain plants that attract ladybirds, like even leaving stinging nettles around, which I'll talk about later, and having things like calendula around. Bring them in so they can hatch the larvae, and then they can eat the aphids. So that's what we want to be doing around that. Help plants be more resistant. So we're going to go into this a little bit more, but I'm just going to skim over it. Using stuff like garlic and alliums around fruit trees does help like the resistance of a tree. And there's a lot to geek out about around that as well, which we will do later. Adds diversity. Instead of monocrops of one thing, we're adding multiple crops in one bed, and we're adding flowers, we're adding beauty, we're bringing in the pollinators, and we're adding multiple crops. So some may be tall, some may be small, and by adding that diversity, your soil gets healthier, and just your general area of where you're growing gets a lot healthier. And diversity is always a winner, whether that's in society, whether that's in the garden. It's always something we should be focusing on. Deterring pests, like I spoke about before, we want to get the good guys in to get rid of the bad guys. So it's natural pesticide pretty much. And I've really started to enhance, started to realize the power of the flower. I used to think flowers were old people used to grow in their gardens when I was a naive lad getting into this, and then now realize how important they are to the garden. So having those beneficial flowers really do help in the garden. I can't really stress that more. Soil improvement, adding companion plants like nitrogen fixers like beans and legumes and peas really do help take the nitrogen out of the air that's all around us, and it sucks it down into the roots and makes it readily available. And there's also multiple things that really do help the soil improve, and that is adding that diversity like I spoke about. And natural support. There's some really cool natural supports. We'll go into it in the Three Sisters slide, but one that I like is as you grow a sunflower, you can actually plant, like let the sunflower get a little bit of spurt of growth, and then you can plant baby cucumbers at the base or beans and have them wrap around the natural support of the sunflower. And that is a really good companion plant. You don't have a snail problem, you have a duck deficiency. That's probably one of my favorite Bill Mollison quotes. I'll say it a lot. And I know it ain't companion planting, but we're talking about pests. And it's a big problem growing organically when you have pests. But a lot of people tend to, if they're not growing like flowers and they're not adding companion planting in, they're going more for like the organic sprays and stuff. But I really do feel that if you've got, like for example, slugs, a big thing is to like grow, like having a micro pond. But there's also those bugs like aphids, white butterfly, things that really get to our plants. And I always feel like that what is the imbalance in my garden that I can add to get rid of that pest, or maybe just having a balance of diversity. So then where's the predator for that pest? And some of those predators come in bugs, but they also come in not so much plants, but deterrents. And we're going to go into that in the next couple of slides, but it's something to think about. I'm always like, if there's an abundance of a pest there, what's the issue here? A lot of the time they're actually doing a good thing because they're recycling plants, but obviously to the detriment of us. So we always need to be like looking at improving the soil, making sure transplants go out a little bit bigger, just to help the strength of the plant, and then adding that diversity, adding those flowers, and really does like boost the plot. Here are some of like my favorite companion plants. These are things that are like my non-negotiables to add into my garden. So my favorite companion plants are herbs, mainly off the back of herbs have like these aromas, and a lot of the smells can get rid of certain pests. This is like a bit of like a slide to show the next couple of slides, because I've got one on herbs, one on comfrey, one on edible pollinating flowers, and one on beans. But yeah, herbs, comfrey, this is like every permaculturalist's favorite plant, just because you can turn it into fertilizer, and it's got a huge tap root, so it mines minerals, and all that stuff I'm going to have on these next slide. Edible pollinating flowers like marigolds. Marigolds, again, seen as a bedding flower, seen in everyone's front gardens, but honestly, this is like such a powerhouse of a plant. And it's something that I make sure I have. And I make sure that all the plants that I do have are edible if I can. So viola, again, that's just more of a pollinator, but it's edible. Nasturtiums is a good trap crop. So eat the leaves, eat the flowers, but also some bugs will tend to eat that over other crops. So it's good to have in the garden as a potential trap crop. So instead of it eating your like kale, for example, that might be more of a cash crop for you, then they're going more towards the nasturtiums. But again, if there's flowers there and there's more of an aroma, it's actually deterring pests as well, and it's a really good ground crop, good cover crop. And beans. I make sure every season my dwarf French beans, I always let a few go to seed and dry out, because I always have a huge pot of beans, and you're going to see why in a little bit in the next couple of slides. So my top tip with courgettes and squash plants, each year I save French bean seeds that will go around. Each year I save French bean seeds because the reason is I normally plant French beans like direct sow around the base of my courgettes and the squash when they go in. I may get a full French bean plant with actual beans. That's a complete win. But if not, I'm just cycling nitrogen out the air and into the soil, because when you put in courgette plants, a lot of the time they're like nutrient deficient. You always see like yellowing leaves, and again, it's always nitrogen. So you can make fertilizer from comfrey and nettle tea. But my favorite tip is to just direct sow 3 to 5 beans around each plant. If you get bean crop, win-win. But if you don't get a bean crop, the bean's going to grow at least and then start sucking some nitrogen under the plant. It's a bit of like one of my top tips for courgettes and squash, because for me, these were always such a valuable crop, because you got the courgette flour, and there's some of like the best cuisine to like stuff the courgette flour with like ricotta or like cashew cheese. And all my chefs saw them as really, really valuable, male and female flowers. So it was really important for me to look after the courgettes, and I really saw a noticeable difference if I direct sowed those French beans. Seem to always have like a good yield. It might have been a bit of a placebo, but the actual what French beans do and legumes do is they are sucking that nitrogen and making it readily available for the plant. So nitrogen fixers are great in the garden, and you can put French beans around at the base of like tomatoes or anything that you want to green up, like even in between lettuces. They're just a really good little crop. I actually love French beans straight off the crop, straight into the mouth. Nothing better. This is something that I've spoken about quite a lot, and this is like this is a bed of spring onion and lettuces, but I always have marigolds in between. So as I do my lettuce plants, I do them in more of like a grid pattern. But as the circumference of the lettuce goes round, there's always like a gap in between. So you've got the 4 lettuces like that, and there's always those gaps in between. And I always put spring onion. So spring onion grows nice, straight and tall. So it actually doesn't affect the plant at all. That is like they're not overgrowing into each other. The lettuces don't seem to bully the spring onion if you are like transplanting like accordingly with good spacing. But it's just something to fit another crop in that bed. So there's more diversity, and any more gaps in between, I put marigold. The reason I put marigold is because the roots exude a smell. If you ever get a transplant of a marigold, it actually smells. It smells really, really strong, and that smell deters cutworm. Cutworm is like a little it looks like a little maggot with like a red head, and they actually eat lettuces from the inside out. So it looks like whack-a-mole, or like it looks like it's almost burnt, like you've not given it enough water. It would completely flop overnight. And I used to, when I first had this issue, I was really struggling what I was doing wrong. I was like watering adequately. And then what I realized is as I picked up the lettuce, there was actually a cutworm inside. And the top tip for cutworm is marigolds. So I always have marigolds within the bed of lettuce. And again, as I said, the spring onions, there is another cash crop in between. I speak like cash crop and valuable plants because I'm coming from the market gardening world, but see it as valuable crops for your belly. Even if you're on an allotment, it's still valuable crops to eat and not be eaten by pests. So this is one of my little favorite tips is lettuce, spring onion, marigold. And we get back onto that plant comfrey. So as I said earlier, permaculture's favorite plant. Bees love it. Recently went on a bee course, and they're like magnetically, like they've got through their eyesight, they see an ultraviolet light. So anything that is ultraviolet, like the flowers of a lot of herbs like rosemary, chives, sage, lavender, but comfrey, you are always going to see bees buzzing around this plant. So it's really important to have it, mainly because you can harvest the leaves as a fertilizer. It's medicinal for us, but it's also medicinal for the garden because of what it does. And recently I've pulled one out, and the taproot was like 3 foot long. It was absolutely ridiculous. What it's doing, it's going down and it's mining the soil. So it's mining deep to bring those nutrients to the surface, and it makes them readily available in the leaves. So taproot mining brings up those nutrients that are not near the surface. So let's say there's like more calcium, like boron, things like that. They're actually going to be in the leaves, and you can either make a fertilizer from them. So nettle and comfrey tea, which again, you can sit in a bucket, but I always tend to stir it or put like little pond aerator in it. Don't let it go, like it will go smelly, but the best is to add aeration into it. If you aerate it, you're getting better properties. It's going to like enhance it a lot. So people just leave it in a bucket, let it go smelly, but you want to be like stirring it, or you want to put like little pond aerator and get some oxygen into it. And that's always the best way when you're making fertilizer. And then put that on the soil, and it's like a little bit of a supercharge for your soil. It's almost unkillable because you can almost you can pretty much dig it up, transplant it anywhere, but also there's a lot of energy in the root, so you can plant the root like bare root, and it will grow. So that's what I love about it. The resilience of that plant is like unmatched. Spoke about the deep taproot, but yes, something to have in the garden is comfrey. Even if it's in a border or tucked away in a shady area, have it. How to holistically protect brassicas, and this is where we're going to get onto how herbs play a big factor for me, especially spearmint. So spearmint is a massive deterrent for white butterfly. So a really top tip of mine is to have buckets of spearmint. Spearmint just seems to be the one that works the best. So it's always like top of the agenda. So you can go, oh, I've got garden mint, but spearmint is the best one for this. And the great thing is you can make a delicious tea out of it. So it's great for you. But also as well, a medicinal property. I shouldn't be giving like medical advice, but I know it's really good for women that have PCOS. So I've had like a few friends that have had it and just gave them spearmint just so they can make tea for that. Like it's a hormonal it balances the hormones. But yeah, so spearmint, In buckets, as I said, you don't want to plant it because you'll have a mint farm before you know it. But buckets of spearmint, have them in between your brassicas, whether it's either end or let's say you can plant some lay the buckets in between. Having that spearmint amongst your kale, let's say, is deterring these guys from laying eggs on your kale. And no joke, I've grown kale. I don't want to like this. It's not like a one shoe fit like fixes an issue. It's just a massive deterrent. You may still have white butterfly lay eggs, but it's doing a really, really good job at protecting your plants. But yeah, I had buckets the last 2 years without protecting them with netting, and I had a really good success by doing this. Other good companion plant for brassicas is dill. Dill is like one of my favorites in between kale and cabbages. Again, it's attracting the right kind of bugs to deter the pests away from your brassicas. As I mentioned, spearmint, sage, and I think sage also deters, not I think, it does. Sage also deters spearmint, so you can have pots of sage around. And again, that's 2 crops in one bed. Celery, so mixing brassicas and celery, like kale and celery, it takes the rust out of celery. So if you get rust in celery, they really like harmonize each other as plants. Lettuce is always good under kale, maybe because as the lettuces are growing, it's adding that dappled shade. So as the kale grows, it adds dappled shade for the lettuce, so it doesn't bolt too quickly. So it's a nice like crop to go under the kale, and they'll just grow happily together. And beans, like I mentioned earlier, you want to be planting beans everywhere. And that is to add nitrogen for kale. That is like really reliant on nitrogen being a leafy green. Oh, currently doing spearmint tin. Love that, Anna. Just going to answer some questions. Beans up sunflowers, love it. I've got marigolds with lettuce, and it's such a good duo. Where do I get comfrey seed or buy it? I have seen it in some garden centres, but it's mega rare. Literally, if you know somewhere where it grows, I've had people just say, "Oh, it grows in my garden. Come dig some up." But you can actually get it online. There's one called Bokin 13. Write this down, guys. Bokin 13, I believe it's like a Russian type, and the reason is it doesn't spread as much. It's quite contained as a plant. But it does spread a little bit comfrey, but it's like one of those good things to have in the corner. But Bokin 13 is a good one because it doesn't spread. It kind of grows and then stays where it is. Leaving patches of wildflowers or leaving a patch of like stinging nettles or like long weeds. So if like say you've got grass in your garden or at your allotment, it's good to like mow areas, but leave some long. So some might have some like natural flowers like yarrow or like fetch and some good things like that where you're attracting some pests, but those long grasses are really good places for like ladybirds to hang out in. And also making some bug hotels. I actually didn't put that on, but recently I made like some bug hotels, and there's a really good one just by getting like I used a thick bamboo post, but even just like a bit of tubing, and you wrap cardboard and shove it in. They love the corrugation, but it's like great places for them to hide. Because once they're in your garden, you want to keep them there. So you need places for them to hide out, as well as having like patches of stinging nettles because that's like their favorite plant. If you ever see stinging nettles in spring, you're going to see ladybirds. And another good plant as well is calendula to attract ladybirds. There's actually quite a lot of good plants. Cornflower, to name another one, but it's something I will actually add onto the group just because you really want to attract these guys. They eat aphids, and the larvae eat aphids, and we do not like aphids. It's something that will wreck plants like kale, beans. I've seen it's such an annoying pest. ants farm them. So if you see ants, you're likely going to see aphids. And things like if you have ants, you can plant stuff like pennyroyal, or I've even seen people put orange peelings around the floor because they just don't like the zestiness of the orange peel. But so yeah, if you see stinging nettles, try and not cut them, harvest them for making fertilizer, but try and leave a patch if you can. The Three Sisters, this is like 101 companion planting to a T. Have you guys heard of the Three Sisters? Right in the chat box. I want to know if you're on it or whether you've heard about it. But I've got a friend who has a cactus greenhouse in London called Elkie. Absolutely fascinating guy. We'll get him to do a webinar at some point. His knowledge on cactuses is so unbelievable. I was like a little kid. I like that a few of you have said no, because this is very interesting. But his knowledge on cactuses and will blow your minds. So we've got to get him on it because he's very knowledgeable. We've got a podcast with him as well. So if you look out for Elkie, go check out the podcast. He was awesome. He knows a lot of stuff. But he's a native to Mexico, and he was telling me, I've known about this for years. You'll see this in a lot of books. But the Three Sisters is an old Native American system, and we need to really, really applaud indigenous teachings, because I feel like permaculture really is just another way on how they've wrapped it up. All these indigenous teachings, so we can download them and understand them in book form, because unfortunately a lot of this gets lost through translation. So it's really, really great that permaculture have used these indigenous practices and wrapped them up. As long as they get praised for indigenous practices, I'm happy. But Native Americans, this is the one and very popular one, the Three Sisters. So the idea of this is corn is the main crop. So this is the cash crop. This is the crop that they wanted. They wanted to use a lot of maize, a lot of corn in their diet. It was really, really sacred to them. So corn going up. The beans, so as the corn grows, the beans were then sowed at the base of the plant, and the climbing bean, not a French bean, a climbing bean, wraps around the corn and uses it as you would like a bamboo cane. So it wraps around, and then you start to have beans coming off the corn plant. So you've now got corns and beans. And the third crop within that is having squash. So squash will be the ground cover. It won't climb up the bean. Sometimes it will, but the idea is that climb up the corn. Sorry, the idea is that it's going to spread along the floor of the corn. What that is doing is it's becoming a mulch. So it's almost making a microclimate under the corn plants. So the leaves are casting shade onto the soil, keeping it nice and cool and moist. And it's actually keeping that water under there, keeping it nice and moist. So because the corn is very heavy feeder, so it needs as much nutrients, as much water as it can get to grow nice big corn plants. And something I've got to say about the beans is that it's a nitrogen fixer. So like I said earlier, it's taking nitrogen out of the air and making it readily available for the corn. So the corns grow nice, big and strong. I'm getting nitrogen from the beans, and the squash is making the ground nice and cool and moist. So I'm getting moisture as well. So it's just a way. What order are they planted out? Great question, Anna. So you want to plant out your corn plants at I'd say about a foot tall, maybe a little bit bigger, about a foot tall. Then you want to be sowing your beans at the base, so direct sowing the beans. And then you want to be transplanting your squash out at the same time as your corn out, because the corn's going to grow nice, straight and tall, and the squash is going to grow as a ground cover. So in that time, the corn should grow nice and tall as the squash is getting bigger. And then if you grow it in a grid section, because corn is pollinated through the wind, so you have to grow in a grid. And then the idea is that the kernels fall in between the leaf and the stem, and then a corn plant, it comes out of there. So Wind is a factor for corn because it's pollinated by the wind. I'm hoping that the seeds pop in there. But I love this because it is just doing everything you want. You're getting nitrogen fixing, you're getting 3 crops in one. But Elkie, I mentioned Elkie because as we was planting this out, he come to the farm to plant out the 3 sisters with me. He said this it even goes from 3 sisters all the way up to 10 sisters. They started to get really inventive with this and started to even plant chilies was the only other one I can remember him saying, but you can start planting other things to enhance this system. So you're growing a lot of crops in a small, like a decent space. You can have this quite small all the way up to like quite a big area. It normally does, I suppose squash eats up a decent sized area, but you can add to it. You can add flowers, you can add other crops that will benefit of those, benefit of the nitrogen fixing and having that good ground cover. So like tall crops. I think sunflowers might be another one as well. But it's a really, really amazing system that I absolutely love. What kind of ratio? So like, let's go really, really basic with this. If you're growing corn out in a grid, let's say minimum, let's say 9 plants of corn. So like, let me get my book out, I'll draw it. Might be better. Sorry. Let's say corn. We want to be adding the squash. Oh, sorry, guys. We want to be adding squash in the middle sections like this. And then the beans right at the base. So the bean will then climb up like that. And then, yeah, the squash will then like all over the floor. I really hope that helped. Right, moving on. I hope you got lots of notes there. I think there's probably going to be a lot of questions at the end of this. Healing herbs. This is something I've come across recently, and I've just been reading Martin Crawford's book, the Food Forest book, and healing herbs, not just for humans. I was so fascinated by this theory, and they theorized that having herbs that like you normally make essential oils out of, like a lemon balm, like lavender, like rosemary, that I actually saw this in the Lake District last week, which was like very serendipitous. But I saw loads of mint at the base of a tree, and it was just thriving there, and the tree was thriving. And the theory is that the essential oils within the plant actually exude out the roots and keep that tree healthy. So it's almost like it's healing the tree, and they've just got like this symbiotic relationship next to each other, and they're just healing. Something I really want to know a little bit more info on, but I think this could like, it's not just me saying it as fact. I would love to open a conversation about this within the app in the academy, because the more information we can find, like if we do create food forests, and I started to like plant mint under trees and lemon balm and things like this. But I saw this in my friend's garden, and it's like the only part of the garden that he didn't put grass over after we'd done the veg beds, of course. But like, found it amazing how this lemon balm was just thriving under this oak tree. And I know the oak's got some splits in the wood, but the growth was super like incredible above. And it just made me think. And I think like if we can think together as a community and think why that might be happening, I think that will spark a really good conversation. So very fascinating concept, and I'm sure we've all got questions around that, but I like it. It makes a lot of sense to me. If it's healing for us, why is it not healing for in nature? Trees, it's in its natural state. So I really like that. So this we're definitely going to get onto in each next slide. I'm going to do apple, plum, cherry, and pear, and talk about some companion plants you could plant around each tree. But recently I've done a rooftop project, and even in the beds, I was extensively researching what needed to go around apple, plum, cherry, and pear, and done so much research, and I come up with these next slides. But having like alliums, chives, and garlic is really good to add, like sow some around the base of the trees. As they grow, they're adding a scent, so they're deterring any pests for that tree. But also you're getting like another crop directly under the tree, and it hasn't really, like, the roots of the tree haven't really affected the growth of the crop. And it's like a resilience. Like garlic's really good for us when we're sick. So I always make that link in nature as well. Like if it grows well together, it tends to taste well together. I'll say this on the slide later on as well, but there's got to be some like symbiotic relationship there, and there's like a pattern there for me in my head that and then doing a lot of research that they all say alliums, Charlie, that's a new crop. Garlic and chive do really well under fruit trees. Comfrey as well. Tap roots, again, mining that soil next to the tree, bring it up to the surface and make it readily available for the tree. Saw loads of comfrey growing around apple trees in Wales, and they all look super happy. So I saw that firsthand, and it's something we should be doing. And it comes up in the Martin Crawford book as well. Pollinator, bees love it. We want to be bringing pollinators to the trees so we get more fruit, more flowers that are pollinated, more fruit. So, companion plant for apples. These are like good ones. We're going to have obviously this saved, but if you want to write it down, please do, because it's good to have in the little memory bank and get it on a notepad. I always tend to remember stuff more if it's written down. Again, chives, really, really great. It always comes up to plant around fruit trees, like I said before. Chamomile is a really good base crop. And again, you know what I said about essential oils and teas and stuff. Chamomile comes up in that. But yeah, chamomile is a really good cover crop, like as a base, and spreads really, really well. So around the soil, around apple trees. Oregano is that slide on the bottom left. Again, herbs, incredible. Certain herbs do well with over other herbs around trees, but oregano is really good for apples. And fennel. After doing loads of research, fennel just seems to be really quality around trees. So it's again really nice flavoursome crop, and again adds something around the base of the tree that you're getting another crop under it at least. Pear trees, African marigold, and after all my research, it wasn't just normal marigold. For some reason, African marigold is like a really, really good companion for pear trees. I found that quite fascinating, that it was like just a certain type of marigold. Nasturtiums, really good ground cover. So again, it's adding, like, keeping that moisture in the ground by loads of coverage around the base. And then bringing in pollinators, bringing in loads of bees. And then what I love about nasturtiums is it's really expensive if you sell it to chefs. I used to get 25p a flower. That's quite nice, isn't it? And then sometimes a big bag of nasturtium leaves I could sell for like £5. So I'm sorry if you guys are not selling for doing it for profit, but I'll always slip that in just in case a few of you guys are. Oregano, again, another really good one with pear trees after a lot of research, and again, chives. So it kept coming up. I think chives will be on every slide. Companion plants for plums. Marigold, really good. What I was saying about its properties bringing in pollinators and the smell of the roots. And what I like about the next three crops is they're all purple as well. So you've got purple plums, or like a mauve color, and then you've got purple flowers when the rosemary flowers, lavender. Again, all of these are like magnetically pulling bees towards it, so to get that early pollination of the plum tree. And then yeah, chives again. Let's go back one. Let's go back one. I was actually meant to do one for cherries, but again, calendula is really good for cherries. Really good for cherries. Definitely alliums again, and I've wrote it down somewhere. Nasturtium. And yeah, nasturtium and lavender. It's another good ones. So I did say it earlier, I'll get too carried away when I'm talking about other stuff, but if they grow well together, they tend to, well, if they taste good together, they tend to grow well together and vice versa. So this is based off of not books, but my theory of like over the years of growing, I've like made the connection of like if it does grow well together, it tends to stay good together. And like the standard one is tomato and basil. It's used in Italian cuisine everywhere. And it is such a powerful crop to grow together because the basil is deterring away a pest that attacks the tomato. I always found dill does really well with cucumber, and you actually like when you do like pickled cucumbers, you add a lot of dill into the brine as well, so that's really interesting. And there is so many more, and if you kind of like have this quote in your head and go around your garden and start learning more about companion planting, you'll see this come up. If it normally goes well on a plate, it actually like grows well together. So there's that connection there, and that connection as you're growing really starts to make a lot of sense to you, and it's like those little bits in the garden that make you happy when you feel like you've learned something through intuition as well. Bad companions, there's such a thing as bad companions. Beans and onions, so stunted growth between each other. I think the onions stunt the growth of beans. Tomatoes and corn, they compete with nutrients because they're very nutrient heavy crops. So don't plant them together. And I believe it's the hornfly which attack the tomatoes and attach corn. So having them planted together is a bit of a no-no because you kind of like that pest is beelining for that area. And again, if they're very heavy feeders, it's not a good idea to grow them together. So you can plant corn in the area of the garden when you're doing the Three Sisters, and keep the tomatoes to the polytunnel or where you want to grow basil and marigolds and some peppers, etc. Asparagus and garlic compete for nutrients, and asparagus will actually give up because asparagus is such a slow grower. The garlic will just outcompete it. Potatoes and sunflowers. Sunflower seeds contain a toxin that prevents the potatoes from growing or like stunts their growth. Garlic and lettuce, allopathic properties to inhibit growth, but garlic and like onion and that is in kind of like the same family, and I've not really seen any detriment using spring onion with lettuces. I don't know if it's different. I don't know if it's just garlic, but I would, as I said earlier, spring onion and lettuce is a really good crop to grow together. I think it's just more garlic. Fennel and eggplant. Fennel produces chemical that affects nightshades, so it's probably not a good idea to plant it near potatoes and tomatoes as well. There's a few more that I've got in the book. What is it? Cabbage and peppers. It inhabits another plant that inhabits growth of nightshades. Another thing to not really plant too close together is squash and cucumbers, because if you wanted to save the seed, they're two different families that if a bee goes from like a cucumber flower to a squash flower, it actually can make it poisonous if you save the seed. So it's two families you don't really want to mix. Obviously, if you've got a small garden, you're going to have cucumbers, you're likely going to have squash, but just don't plant them like directly next to each other or like with each other. It's just a little good rule of thumb. And potatoes and zucchini. Like garlic contains compounds that affect, oh no, potatoes, sorry. just really does affect the growth of like zucchinis. Just it harbors the growth. So we've actually come to the end of that. I could actually talk more on more stuff, but I'm hoping that you guys have a lot of questions that can really excite a conversation and bring more out of me. But I feel like I could do another webinar around this and just part two. So if you guys can just drop in the chat box, or if you actually want to talk directly, you can turn on your mic, but like message in the chat box first, and we'll do that.
And guys, just to say, Jack has just actually smashed that and not stopped talking for like an hour. So a couple of thumbs up in the chat
Sorry.
box as well would be amazing. I know him very well. I know he can talk for hours and hours on this. And it's really exciting to hear his passion, his knowledge. You can hear that it just flows from him. I'm really excited to follow up with a part two as well, because a lot of what Jack's been talking about, I've been learning the under the soil reasons for why this happens. I'm just not in a sort of confident position to be able to like turn that information into something that can I can put across just yet, because basically the course that I'm doing is 150 learning hours just to do the first module. So it's it's a lot of information. It's like a science degree, but I want to be able to pull out the information that is really applicable to us as growers. So yeah, it's really exciting. It's exciting for me to listen to Jack again, go through these points that I've learned from him over the years, because I can apply the science in my brain as to why that's happening. But if you do want to sort of delve into some of the science of that, do look up the soil food web and nutrition cycling, because nutrition cycling is one of the main things, main important parts of what Jack's talking about having diversity in the ground, having different types, but companion planting, putting things together so that they complement each other. It's the nutrient cycling and how the microbiology under the ground helps those plants to talk. That's when we get really nerdy, but it gets really, really interesting. So I've pulled out a couple of questions, Jack, if you're up for it, if you've recovered and had a drink, mate.
I didn't know that was an hour. Oh, sorry guys if you're busy, but yeah, no, I'm glad there was a lot of information there to get over, but it's like really important that you can apply now. That's the idea, is like you can go in your garden, you can probably go to the garden center, get marigolds, get some of these plants and just like boom, get them in the ground, because now is like that most of what we spoke about is available. And even comfrey, you put a link on there, I saw.
Yeah, I just got that Bocking 14 Comfrey link on there. I'm going to be selfish and ask my question first. Marigolds, does it matter if they're French or English marigold types?
That's a great question. Great question. French is it's not to do with nationality. It's to do
No.
with them just have it, they exude that smell. So the French ones have that smell in the roots that really do deter that cutworm. Again, like for bees, they're both good. And what I like about African marigolds is the height. I really love the height of them. And for the life of me, I sowed these ones the other year, and one bush got massive, and it had over 100 to 200 flowers on it. And I've never been able to like found the same packet of seeds. I saved them, because now whenever I buy French marigolds, they don't really get much bigger than this. Like so, but yeah, French ones they exude the smell.
Awesome.
And
So
pot marigolds, which are calendulas, the medicinal ones, the orange ones. So you can actually make like face creams out of them if you want to go like that deep into it, and teas and stuff.
love it. Love it. So Jen said, would you grow comfrey from seed, or would you buy it as cuttings or plants?
Anything done from seed is just going to take longer, but comfrey's so native and or just does so well here that if you just dig up a bit of root, like I've done it this year multiple times, dug up roots from people's gardens or allotments like that I've got permission for, and replanted it in food forests, and they look terrible at first, like bear with them, they'll just like be so floppy for weeks, and then all the new growth just goes bang bang bang, and it's just like it's alive again. So yeah, just if you can get a cut in, do that. If you get a seed, it's going to do the same. It's just going to take longer. You won't see the benefit of it this year.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. And thanks for the question, Jen. Lisa says, I'm short on space, so I've planted some lettuces in between my greenhouse tomatoes. Is that okay? I've got some marigolds I could put into if that would help.
Yeah, that's great. Lettuce is a really good ground cover. Again, the tomatoes growing nice and tall, so they're probably adding a little bit of shade, but they're not like being shaded out. So as long as you keep the bottom foot of trussels like all pinched out as the season goes on, we want to get airflow under those tomatoes and not crowd it down there too much because me and Chris both know like how bad blight is and how much it can wipe you out. So you want to add that airflow under the tomatoes. But having the lettuce there in like as the first crop in spring, because they'll probably bolt if they're in a polytunnel by summer. But having them there now is really good. That's really good practice. Recommend that a lot. And then get the basil in. Get the basil in after.
It's exactly what I do. Tomatoes go in amongst lettuces because that bed will have been full of lettuces in the early part of the season. As you get to sort of nowish, it's pretty warm, isn't it? So those get start to bolt. I've had a couple of cuttings from them, but lettuce tends to grow slower in the greenhouse than the polytunnel as you get into the hot spring. And so as those lettuces are coming out, I'm now planting basil. So yeah, it's a good successional planting, and it ties into Jack's companion planting, but also ties into the good practice of keeping the soil covered as much as possible. An empty bed, like it's not an empty bed because it's just if it's just got tomatoes in, but it's emptier. Like there's still a lot of bare soil in that. So yeah, getting things like basil and lettuces in between makes a big difference. Um,
Nasturtiums do really well. Like I know they go nuts in a polytunnel, like absolutely nuts. But what I know, so my dad took over my allotment a few years ago, and he went in spring and planted tomatoes and nasturtiums just self-seeded from the previous year. It didn't get watered once the whole summer, like, and I'm talking it was a hot summer. The nasturtiums, what they done, and the tomatoes grew like really well, had tomatoes on. And I couldn't get my head around it because it hadn't rained. But the nasturtiums had actually made almost like a barrier between the soil and the bottom of the plant. So they had a microclimate just cycling like moisture, like whenever it evaporated, it hit the bottom underside of the leaves and then like rained back down on them. So they were getting moisture from that. And I just found that fascinating that it done that. And that I was like, as if tomatoes normally take so much maintenance to like look after, and then there it's just had no water. The nasturtiums have protected it completely, and it was like a visual of like what I've been speaking about.
Love
So
that.
yeah, very cool.
And Lisa, hopefully that answers your question. Um, Anna, who's disguised as Tom, says, okay, just to open another potential can of worms here, thinking of trying a few mushroom logs in the poly between the tomatoes and melons. What do you think, Jack? I think my only thought is you'd have to keep the moisture on them pretty high.
I know it's like a lot more humid. You can't like let the humidity drop, but also I don't think they like to be baked, Tom, as well. So if you've got a
Mm.
shady part of your garden, like that's where they want to be, like just kind of out the sun. And then when it gets to autumn and the humidity rises, it's almost like being under a woodland. If you can imagine how mushrooms grow in a woodland area, um, I think that's the best part from them. I've never seen them in a polytunnel, but like the way I've like dealt with mushrooms, it I don't think it would work. It would be good to trial one as like a trial. If it works, then you're doing something no one else is doing. But yeah, I would say maybe in the shady part of the garden is like a is probably like the best spot, or like a woodland area of your patch or whatever if you've got the blessing of some trees. But yeah, I've never heard of that. I'd just be so careful because it gets to like 40 plus in the summer in the polytunnel, and it for me that doesn't. I don't think it would like it at all. It would almost like it'll wipe it out or dry it out too much.
Be an exciting test though if we could see if like you could cover some polytunnels and greenhouses for season extension. Could we give mushroom logs a kickstart by doing them in the winter in a poly and then moving them out under a tree. I know mine went straight in a little bit of woodland behind the house. But they were there. Did them in the winter in the cold, so I think they're going to take a little bit longer. I wonder if it would be an interesting experiment to see if we could kickstart them in a poly. That would be cool.
Yeah, it's worth it, and that's what we're like. The academy's about. Like, if you have a success with that, Tom, it's like put it in the group and we chat about it, and you're like, oh, why do we think that worked? Why it might have not worked? And I think that's what we're trying to do, is like, if we can support each other and figure stuff out, then we all benefit from that. So yeah, it's worth it. It's worth trying one at least. Then it's not too much of an expense. But shady part of the garden is you tend to gonna it's gonna be a better idea to put them there or under trees.
And I'm sure our good friend Elliot at Urban Farming can probably shine a bit more light on that. Have a look on there for more information, and maybe some of the different types of mushrooms that he's got there might be a bit more suited to slightly warmer temperaments. I don't know, but yeah, he certainly knows a bit more than we do. This is awesome. So we want to carry this chat on, guys. So we want to carry this on in the community. Whether you're watching this live now or watching it back later, jump into the community. We hope you're enjoying the new app that we've got, the Heartbeat app. And if you had seen what it was before, hopefully this is a bit easier to use, a bit easier to jump in. And hopefully it's been easier to jump into this webinar and get reminders and that sort of things. I hope that's been good. But if you could just all do me a massive favor and give a load of thumbs up and messages in, because Jack just absolutely smashed that with loads of content and a whole hour of talking. So a couple of thumbs up in the box would be awesome.
Yeah, even if there's like one thing that you learned that you stuck in your head from that, like write in the chat before you go. I'd be really interested to see like what you retained, even if it's just one thing that you think, oh, it might be something simple, like the lemon balm under the tree, like the herbs under the tree, or whatever. But it's always cool to know that you might have learned something.
Yeah, for me, it's going to be spearmint everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. Those little white buggers have already started coming out, haven't they? So that's going to be it.
Yeah, it definitely works, man. And it's great to have those aromas around the plot as well. I mean, mint's really easy to cultivate, and it's easy, very easy crop.
Right, well, thanks so much, guys. As always, these will be, it'll probably take a bit time to bounce down, but in the next couple of days, this will be uploaded into on the Heartbeat app where you find our community. There's a section called previous webinars, and you'll be able to watch this in there. And obviously jump into the community, have a chat, ask any questions. If there's anything you've forgotten or any links that have jumped off of this chat, then jump in there and ask, and we'll post them on the community.
Yes, cheers, guys. Thanks so much for turning up and hanging around for the last hour. Yeah, pleasure to get that one across. I really enjoyed that. I mean, it's something I'm really geeky about. So yeah, brilliant.
Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.